What's going on, everybody? It is that time again. The Sooners Illustrated Podcast, episode 132 on this Wednesday, November 27th, 2024. Josh Callaway, Collin Kennedy coming at you a day early, Thanksgiving tomorrow. So we're hitting it on a Wednesday. Got a lot of recruiting stuff to get into. National Signing Day a week from today. So we've got some stuff we need to get in before that fateful day next Wednesday. Oklahoma back in search of a 2025 quarterback. We'll, of course, talk about that. The recruiting reaction after the big upset win over Alabama. How are commits, recruits surveying things after that? Got the right guy to ask in Collin Kennedy. And yes, we will have another Michael Fasusi update, which is just kind of a regular feature on the shows these days. We'll talk about that as well. And, of course, we call his thoughts on the LSU game and James G. Jackson along for an instant recruiting roundup. So a loaded Wednesday show to send you into your holiday weekend. But, Colin, let's start with Kevin Sperry. So this happened at the tail end of last week after we'd already done last week's show. You know, I'm curious to get, your input on all of this as far as, where Oklahoma's going to go from here. But starting with Kevin, just in general first, as far as what happened, because this is something that it's weird because, and again, you know far better than me, it didn't feel like totally out of nowhere, but it did feel a little like the timing of it was kind of, and the fact that it was just a straight up flip, right? He goes to Florida State. I guess your reaction whenever you saw this, and Kevin, who's been on the board for so long and was such a big part of putting together the 2025 class for Oklahoma, all those Carl Albert guys.
Yeah.
Just, the guy's been as bought in as anyone, and all of a sudden, nope, he's gone, and he's going to Florida State just a little, at the time, less than 2 weeks until signing day. What was your reaction when you first saw this? And then we'll evaluate some QB options for Oklahoma, in moving forward now with signing day again, just a week away.
Yeah, I think when it initially came out, full disclosure, I had a source reach out kind of in a mystic way, for lack of a better term, and say something to the degree of, hey, keep your eyes open this week. And I didn't know fully what that meant, but then you dive into it a little bit further. You got the sense something was about to go down, and then Kevin Sperry flips and I do think that there is an element of surprise here because talking to some of the Oklahoma commits over the past few days, a lot of them did not see this coming. A lot of them were asking me what I thought about the situation and how it all went down and what might be next. And so this is kind of something that it still did catch a few people off guard. Now, Josh, this is what I really wanted to get into. I know that there's a narrative out there that this had been something in the works for weeks to months. And I'm not going to completely disagree, but at the same time, I am going to push back on that because I don't think it's fair to the kid. Kevin, there's like this notion that he was on flip watch to go anywhere, blah, blah, blah. And I'll dive into this more on the board for our subscribers, but basically, Kevin Sperry commits to Jeff Lebby, and that's his guy. Oklahoma offers him early in the process. It's a nearby program that he had wanted to play at. The commitment happens, and Kevin, again, I mean, the guy committed at a time where there was no 2024 or 2025 commits in either class. The guy has this idea that he's not necessarily been all that faithful for however long. I'm saying this based off of intel that I have. It just really isn't accurate. But when you fast forward to, let's say, whenever the hiring of Seth Luttrell was finalized, there definitely became a little bit of a mutual understanding that I think if Seth Luttrell had his druthers, his personal choice, maybe he would have the ability to look elsewhere. Obviously, he's a new offensive coordinator for the program he graduated from. Like, any OC is going to want to have the freedom to choose their guy.
Sure.
And so there was a span of time where communication kind of fell off to a degree between Kevin Sperry and Seth Luttrell as the season went on or whatever else. Around that time, people in Kevin's camp kind of put out just a little bit of feelers in a just in case situation. What would people out there say? But after those conversations, Josh, I was told by several people Kevin had 100% intention to go play at Oklahoma, because what people forget, and you brought it up a little bit, when he moved into the state of Oklahoma to be at all these OU games or whatever, and be at all these events and help recruit the Carl Albert kids, whatever else, his family had to be separated. And that's tough for any young man to go through. After that time period, the Sperry family kind of was able to reunite and get all under one roof for the first time in a year plus in the North Texas area. And with that kind of family dynamic back intact, like Kevin for a very long time has had plans to go play at OU, not only because of how long he's been pledged and the type of program he's been committed to, but also not taking for granted that family dynamic that is now just a couple hours away from Norman. Like, he wanted to be able to go play at Oklahoma, but then also continue to appreciate family time that wasn't always consistently available to him whenever he was committed and moved into the state. But when Mike Norvell calls you and Florida State loses their quarterback commit to Florida, and the head coach at Florida State, who, by the way, calls plays, I know that there's kind of this conversation about why would you go to Florida State? Well, yes, they're looking for an offensive coordinator, but Norvell's the play caller.
Yeah,
so
there's some stability there. Yeah,
you're not going into this completely green. I mean, the system and the offensive mind at the helm of this. Norvell got in touch, and one thing led to another. And again, I'll have a few more notes on this for the good folks out there to talk about at the Thanksgiving dinner table, but it just made a lot of sense. And so I wish Kevin Sperry, and I'll tell him this in person the next time I do get to see him face to face, I'm happy for the kid. I wish him nothing but the best. He has caught a lot of flack, and some of it pretty unjust. And I mean, the kid himself is awesome. He's a great kid. I got to see him a couple weeks ago, and we talked for a really long time one-on-one, and he's mature beyond his years. He's sacrificed a lot, and he's gone through a lot of stuff that not a lot of kids his age have to go through. And so he identified Florida State as a fit for him, and I think we should all be very excited for a guy like that to do what's best for him at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you could really knock him too much. He stuck it out with OU through a lot of change. I mean, obviously, like you said, Jeff Levy was his guy, and now there was Seth Luttrell, and now they're on the look for another coordinator. And he was pretty consistent throughout that. And, we talked about it on the show a couple times. We talked about it off air a few times. Is everything still in good shape with Kevin? The answer was always yes. Obviously he moves up to Carl Albert. He moves back down to Texas. Now they're at Denton Guyer. It's questioned then. We talked about the show at the time. He transferred. He left Oklahoma City. Is he still good? And the answer was yes. So he, through a lot of changes, both in Norman as well as just his life, he stayed pretty solid with Oklahoma, and he helped put together that 2025 class. And he was at all the camps again this past summer in Norman. Participating, didn't have to do that. So. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's kind of like, it's hard to blame him for this opportunity. And, we'll see how it shakes out in the long run. Oklahoma's going to be fine, and obviously you can speak better than I can. And we'll talk about what the options are here in just a second. But, you have Jaden O'Neal still there in 26. You still have two guys in the room right now that, trying to figure out what the future is. You're about to hit the portal, though, and probably look for another body. Like, it kind of, for both parties, it's fine, and it'll be good in the long run, and a good opportunity for Kevin to go Florida State, which obviously having a rough year, but that's a program that you don't imagine is going to be down for long. They went undefeated last season, so it's going to be a good spot for him. I feel like in due time. So
it's a mutual parting of ways. Like, I genuinely do believe that everyone is okay with this result. I don't think that there's any bad blood or disdain on either side. I think everyone just kind of gets it. And I think that's the other layer to this too. Oklahoma has Jaden O'Neal in the fold. And by the way, I do think Kevin kind of did Oklahoma a little bit of a favor, to however much you want to appreciate it, in that when he realized this was something that he wanted to do, he did it in a timely fashion in order to give Oklahoma enough time ahead of the early signing period to adjust properly.
And on that note, so what's next for Oklahoma? Obviously, you don't have a quarterback in 2025 now. I don't want to sound like I'm speaking at both sides of my mouth, but you have Jaden O'Neal in 2026, and you do still have, obviously, Jackson Arnold and Michael Hawkins currently. And obviously what those guys are going to decide to do remains to be seen. Obviously that'll be sifted through here soon as the regular season winds down. But you're kind of looking at like, okay, we still want a 2025 quarterback, I would think. I mean, if let's just play devil's advocate, if Jackson and Michael Hawkins both did decide to look at different things, all of a sudden you're looking at your roster saying, where are the quarterbacks? Again, not saying that's going to happen, but possible. Anything's possible. So what are the options, and what are is your understanding of what Oklahoma's trying to do now in 2025? Obviously, there's a number of in-state kids that OU fans are certainly intrigued by. What about on your end as far as what actually could happen for Oklahoma in this 25 group to get a quarterback in there?
Yeah, and look, the other part of this too is there's the Jackson Arnold situation. There's the Michael Hawkins situation.
Right.
Casey Thompson is going to be gone. Brendan Zurbrugg, scholarship quarterback. What might happen with him? I mean, we just don't know in the era of the transfer portal and the quarterback turnover that's typically generated because of it, right? So I think first and foremost, you do have to mention Oklahoma going out and finding a quarterback in the transfer portal feels very likely. Now, if some sort of further turnover hits beyond the scholarship that's going to be vacated, known to be vacated by Casey Thompson, you really want to make sure you have a able and capable body coming in from the 2025 recruiting cycle, because at the end of the day, too, you never want to take what you have for granted. And so, exactly like you mentioned, this is going to be the cycle, if Oklahoma is going to have to adjust late at the quarterback position, that it can do so pretty effectively on paper. On paper is obviously the term of emphasis. In-state quarterbacks aplenty in this 2025 class.
Wow.
Everyone's going to want to talk about Jamarian Ficklin right off the top, the Texas State commit out of Muskogee, Oklahoma. I will have some more notes coming up. Had a couple of texts and calls this morning about it. Jamarian is a very fascinating case study because been committed to Texas State for a very long time. I think everyone in the state of Oklahoma and even beyond it, there are a lot of people who are a big fan of Jamarian Ficklin, and rightfully so. This guy is awesome. He's a great player, but also a really fun personality that people gravitate towards. And you saw some of the social media reaction whenever Kevin Sperry announced his flip. There were a lot of in-state recruits that were lobbying publicly for Jamarian Ficklin to be the target for Oklahoma at quarterback. So for me personally, you do, if you're Oklahoma, probably have to look towards Jamarian Ficklin first. But as we know, I believe our buddy Josh McQuistion was the first to report this. There was a conversation had between Jamarian Ficklin and Oklahoma the Wednesday of the Alabama-Oklahoma game when he was supposed to take an unofficial visit in Norman that weekend, that OU basically told him, hey, we're going to go in a different direction. Now, we could podcast for hours about the meaning of that conversation. I am not going to.
Right.
But as I did note in the immediate reaction piece that I wrote, like, no matter what you tell Jamarian Ficklin, and we all understand this, he has to, and he was ultimately going to be the guy that Oklahoma was going to pursue in the immediate aftermath of Sperry's flip. Those conversations are still ongoing. Like I said, I'll have some notes up. Black Friday sale going on right now, by the way. But not only is he committed to Texas State still, he took an official visit to Utah the weekend that he was going to be in Norman for the Alabama game. And he told me that visit was incredible. Now, Utah is in a little bit of a tricky spot as well. They obviously fired Andy Ludwig, who was the offensive coordinator there.
Mm-hmm.
The future of Kyle Whittingham is still relatively unknown. I know he's
Right.
mentioned a time or two this season that he's going to come to a decision after the year is over. And I believe the direct quote was he's going to do what's best for the Utah football program. And so you just don't know. Now, I think the other thing you can't ignore either is that there's probably going to be a lot of other programs that choose to get in the mix for Ficklin down the stretch. So Oklahoma's really going to have to find a way to rectify the situation here and mend the fences, rebuild the bridge, and pursue Ficklin if that's the guy they want to go after. If things don't work out, you've got Grady Adamson committed to Georgia Tech in-state, arguably the most polished and college-ready quarterback in the state, 6'2", 6'3",
He's
about
good.
200 plus pounds, certified dude. A lot of people really like him. You've got David McComb, an in-state kid committed to Kansas, who tests athletically out the wazoo. Kind of a underrated, freaky athletic profile for McComb. Been committed to the Jayhawks for a very long time. You got Shaker out there in the Tulsa area. Been committed to Boston College for a long time. And that's the list to choose from outside of a few others. I'll throw out a name that I think would be kind of fun here in a second. But number one, kind of an interesting nugget. When the night that Sperry flipped and I put out the piece about in-state quarterbacks and a few of those targets potentially being guys, there were a couple of SEC staffers at other programs that DM'd or texted me after this came out and said, hey, love Ficklin, love Shaker, or love Adamson, or whoever. Like, there are a lot of other personnel folks in the conference that are big fans of some of these in-state signal callers in the Sooner State. But if you're going to go after them, I mean, you got to choose your guy, right? And you can't miss. So this is the other point that I want to make. This situation, the thing that's probably not being talked about enough is that somehow Oklahoma's going to have to find a way to navigate this thing still while not having an offensive coordinator. Still
Right.
not having
a quarterback's
coach. Right. That's wild. You know what I mean? I mean, that's crazy to think about, that now Oklahoma has to basically, you really do have to find a way to make this difficult situation play out perfectly, because if you pick incorrectly, you miss. Let's say you pick a guy and you get him, but it's not maybe the individual that would have gotten the vote from whoever this hire is going to be. I mean, that's kind of a miss too. And so there's a lot of layers to the situation, man. It's going to be really tough to navigate while we're sitting here talking. Kind of my just fun, wish it could happen thing. Because, I mean, this is podcasting. We can just talk about what we want to talk about. And it's Thanksgiving. We need stuff to talk about other than politics. I'll tell you what, Josh, if Oklahoma wants to go find the next Baker Mayfield, or at least the Baker Mayfield in the state of Texas, you know, Houston, the Cougs moved on from their offensive coordinator, Kevin Barbay, this week. Houston also has Keyshawn Henderson, who is a 5-star recruit in the class of 2026. He's like this freaky athletic overall athlete type, but Houston has been recruiting him to the quarterback position. If anyone out there, maybe in the personnel offices at Oklahoma, is curious, I mean, I do love me some Austin Carlisle down there at Fort Bend Ridge Point, but anyway, this is something we haven't necessarily seen before. It's a storyline that the Oklahoma beat hasn't really had to monitor in a while. And as a result, it creates, I mean, one of the most fascinating developments down the stretch, I would argue, across the country. Who is Oklahoma going to go get at quarterback? We don't know. Hopefully we'll find out soon, but it's now on OU to figure out the best guy for that position.
Yeah, and the ripple effects, right? Because, I mean, all those programs Kansas, Georgia Tech, Boston College,
Yes.
State, they're all wondering, are we about to lose our guy in 2025 because Oklahoma's going to scoop him up? And, if this was going to happen, and I would imagine you never really want your 2025 quarterback commit who you've had for years. You never want to lose a guy like that 2 weeks before signing day. But there was ever a year for it to happen. Shout out to the state of Oklahoma, 4 in-state quarterbacks that likely could end up at Power 5 programs. Shout out Oklahoma. Give Oklahoma their flowers, in-state football for producing that this year. So we'll see. It's going to be fun to keep an eye on. Obviously, all those guys are really talented. Oklahoma fans in-state that keep up with high school football know those names and probably have at least seen them in some capacity. And they all can play. And we'll see what happens if Oklahoma does, in fact, get one of them to flip over before signing day a week from today. So a lot to be sifted through. A lot to figure out here. Like you said, still navigating the fact that they have to hire an OC as well. So, there's some wrinkles to it, but it'll be fun to keep up with. So Kevin Sperry decommitted on Thursday night last week. About 48 hours-ish later, Oklahoma was getting underway in one of the bigger wins in recent program history as they knocked off Alabama on Saturday night. Also, we talked about the game in full on Monday's show with Tom and James and what it means and all that stuff. I'm curious, Collin, the recruiting reaction that you've gotten since this game, because Brent Venables talked about it yesterday at his press conference. He said, I believe the exact quote is, "I'm not naive to the reality that it's helping us a lot." Basically, he kind of admitted, you go put a performance like that out there at home with a lot of guys there, and even the guys who weren't there, who we'll talk about one in a minute. You see it. It led, one of those classic, it led Sports Center type of games. It was all over social media. I mean, it was a big deal to not just upset Alabama, but to control the game and really dominate the game the way that they did. For you, both from the current commits, obviously, but more importantly, the targets that were there, what has been kind of the feedback you've gotten in terms of, I would think that this was a perception-changing type of game because – as Brent Venables said himself again yesterday, it was kind of a proof of concept and a little bit of that, when Oklahoma's been touting this, we're just really beat up right now. When it all comes together, we're still really good. It kind of puts some weight behind those words whenever you put together a game like this. What's been the reaction from guys that you've gotten so far in the days since this obviously seismic win for Oklahoma?
You want to talk about a topic I could podcast about for 3 hours plus. Folks, let me tell you, there are times after Oklahoma games as just the lowly recruiting guy where I am itching to talk some ball. Oklahoma goes and beats Alabama. Oh my God. I was like, I need to talk about this game some way, somehow. Of course, we need to address the recruiting side because let's start here, man. How bleak did it feel when Kevin Sperry flips and you got Alabama? You're staring down the barrel of facing the Crimson Tide. And it was like, man, this could go south real fast.
Yeah, right.
Boy, did it not. It was north all the way. And I would argue, I think there's obviously the debate that where does this stack up in terms of the biggest win in programs history? Like, where does it tier? From a recruiting perspective, I don't know about all time in terms of wins, but from recruiting, this is about as good as it gets.
So needed, just like the timing of it. Perfect.
I don't think it genuinely could have come not only at a better time, but in better fashion either. Like, it's one thing to pull off a thrilling upset victory over the Alabama Crimson Tide in Norman by a field goal.
Yeah.
They whooped them. They whooped Alabama, and that's all these recruits are talking about, man. They stormed the field with all the fans. I can't tell you how many of these recruits were like, that was one of, if not the loudest stadium environments I've been in my recruitment. A lot of the recruits went into the locker room afterwards to partake in the frenzy that Zach Alley was talking about. I don't know how many of those frat guys that snuck in got to meet the recruits, but
It looked like
hopefully they were.
Yeah,
fellas, I hope you did your job. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if they're paying you, you go do something. That a lot of the current players after all this went down went back to the dorms, whatever, and all these recruits got to spend time with the current players. And obviously all they're talking about is that's the loudest stadium I've ever played in at OU. I mean, that's one of our biggest wins, or this is the kind of team we feel like we can be. So just all the momentum that's garnered just beyond the playing field, it's massive. I think there's a number of different directions I could take here, but let me start with this. We'll work our way up. The commitment side of this will be understated, but my gosh, Josh, I mean, it's huge, because think about this. When you're a recruit, you're the talk of your town, right? Everyone wants to talk to you about everything that's going on with you, or especially the program you're committed to, because you kind of become like, I always say, you're the guy wearing the team t-shirt in the airport. Somehow, some way, people find you and they want to talk to you like you're a team representative. A lot of these pledges for Oklahoma, they've had a tough time, right? They're getting an earful from all these people around them about Oklahoma and all this other stuff. Maybe you should look elsewhere, blah, blah, blah. And after a while, man, especially when you're that young, that gets old. That's having to defend and fight. I mean, you're not seeing a lot of return on investment on that. And so to kind of reinstill the belief, give these guys a little bit of something to talk about on the positive note as far as the program they've been pledged to for a long time. I mean, it's huge. Amarian Robinson was in attendance at a time where Arkansas has been throwing the kitchen sink at this guy. Oregon rumors have come up, blah, blah, blah. All these other recruits that have been committed to Oklahoma, that all these other schools have been calling and texting and trying to get them to answer the phone, maybe even take a visit. Like, they all suddenly feel a lot better about where they're headed. I mean, we talk so much about recruiting externally. To have a win like that help you keep your internal commits intact, like that, flips only really get talked about when it happens. But now this is a preventative measure, and that's massive.
Right.
Going up. One thing I was really thinking about while I was driving out here to beautiful Midland, Texas, out here in the tumbleweeds, is I was talking to Mason James on the phone. This is a kid from Norman, down the street. Talking to guys like Taj Overton, talking to some of these other in-state recruits. I think the thing that we forget is that obviously a lot of Oklahoma fans just assume, well, if it's an in-state recruit, they're going to go to Oklahoma. This 2026 cycle coming up, I mean, that not only is it a really good class, but, man, they're getting pursued by a lot of big brand names at a time where Oklahoma had been struggling.
Right.
And the redundancy that takes place for these guys. Like, think about it. In the same way that you and me sitting here podcasting used to be like a dream or a goal, now this is repetitive to us. This is the job. Or to people out there checking into the office, swiping the key card or whatever, it's just another thing that happens. For a lot of these recruits in the state of Oklahoma, visiting OU or seeing the locker room for the 37th time, I mean, it's same old stuff. It's numbed to them.
Sure.
You gave in-state prospects who you have to lock down an experience that they had never been a part of before, and something they'll never forget as it associates to Oklahoma. I mean, Josh, that's massive. These guys now can look at Oklahoma and say, if I do go to the in-state school where everyone just assumes I'm going to go, and I have to hear about it all the time, I have to see this place for the billionth occasion, I can go toe-to-toe with Alabama. I can go toe-to-toe with name your SEC program or whatever else.
Sure.
And they witnessed that in person. Katie Jones was there, and think about how often or how much that guy knows about Oklahoma. But he himself got to see OU beat Bama in person and storm the field. Like, that's not something these in-state guys get to be a part of up until a moment like that happens. I think that is a huge part of this, helping Oklahoma to give these in-state recruits, a lot of them being elite players, something they can now associate with just the program that they know well and everyone just assumes they're going to go to. Speaking of the commitment stuff, the next part of this, the out-of-state recruiting. I mean, Jaden O'Neal is a kid from California. That guy has, I'm sure, had to battle through a lot of defending on his part.
Yeah.
I mean, I was told he was doing some work in the stands, man. I was told he was chatting everybody's ears off, talking about, this is why I want to come here. And Jaden has seen the vision. A lot of these out-of-state guys haven't. Like, whether it's a Tristan Phillips out there on the West Coast, the linebacker who's getting ready to make a decision in December, that guy comes in, I believe, for his first ever experience in Norman. And you see other Cali kids around you watching this game, and you're storming the field. And Norman, Oklahoma, probably didn't even know this was a place a couple years ago. Like, that's huge. Jordan Edmonds, I was really excited to get to talk about this guy. Jumbo corner, all a 6'3" and like 185 pounds.
Yeah.
Massive tree of defensive back out of the state of Georgia. I made his 24/7 profile, by the way. The kid has, ever since I made his profile, talked about Oklahoma. But you got the Georgias, you got the Bamas, you got the Tennessees. You know what I mean? Like, that's a Southeast kid who all he knows is big wins. And you want to talk about redundancy, winning games like it's nothing. A kid like that, who, by the way, is like a really humble, quiet, observative kid. He comes to Norman, Oklahoma for the first time from the Southeast, and he witnesses Bama getting beaten by a field storming. I mean, it's one thing if you're like Mason James. We're talking about the in-state impressions. Mason James getting recruited by Alabama among Michigan, Tennessee, Ole Miss, so on and so forth. When you're a kid in the Southeast that visited for that game, and you watch Alabama go down and you witness this environment that is Oklahoma, all of a sudden you're like, maybe I should think about leaving home and going to unknown territory. So there's all of these different storylines. The last thing I'll talk about, the lone official visitor of the weekend, Caleb Burns. This was Oklahoma's last chance to take a shot at the 2025 linebacker prospect from Cypress, Texas. Still committed to Baylor, but I wrote it in the notes package that I put on the board for our subscribers. You need a good luck charm, you call Caleb Burns, folks. I mean,
yeah, he's been there for some good ones. Yeah.
He goes to Oregon and watches the Ducks take down Ohio State in what many called the best atmosphere of the college football season to that point. He comes to Norman, and all of a sudden, Oklahoma beats Alabama when they're 5-5. And by the way, he committed to Baylor in the summer when the future of the program was unknown. And since his pledge, that whole staff has saved their jobs. And so Caleb Burns, man, I don't know what it is. Maybe he's carrying around a 4-leaf clover, but this was a really productive visit for Caleb Burns. Sure. He will make his final decision on signing day, I guess, during the early signing period. So, and I'll have another update, but I did put what I had heard to this point on our board. Again, we're running the Black Friday sale, so 75% off subscriptions for us at Sooners Illustrated. Hope you'll join us. This is tricky because I think Caleb had a great time. I think Caleb got to spend a lot of quality time with Zach Alley, with Brent Venables, with Curtis Lofton. He was part of the field storming, obviously experienced that SEC atmosphere, and Oklahoma is basically the lone SEC school in the mix now for him, if you think about it. But there's also kind of the layer of, for Caleb Burns, what do you want to do? because everyone kind of presents a different opportunity in this race. I know personally where I view the tiers. I would say Oregon is at 3, Oklahoma probably at 2 and climbing maybe down the stretch. Baylor, he's still committed. There has to be slotted at number 1.
Sure.
And again, I'll have more notes up hopefully here soon for our subscribers. But I think the big thing with Burns, he takes that visit for the Oklahoma game against Alabama. Oklahoma gives him something to think about. The thing we're all waiting for behind the scenes is whether or not he shows up at Baylor this weekend for the end of the regular season. I'm blanking on who they play, but if Burns shows up in Waco for the conclusion of the regular season, I would assume that would end up being probably a multi-day trip. That's going to give this Baylor staff, a Baylor staff that's found a good amount of success on the field this year and can reestablish the program vision. And by the way, I mean, Oregon is Oregon, Oklahoma is Oklahoma, but Baylor has Burns' most trusted relationship in his recruitment in Jamar Chaney, the linebackers coach. The storyline there is if Burns shows up at Baylor on Saturday, that tells you a lot. If he doesn't, all of a sudden, Oklahoma, Oregon get into the edge of your seat. So the Sooners did what they needed to do to get in the mix with Burns and all these other recruits I just talked about. And obviously it has a ton to do with the field result that came from beating Alabama. Massive win. Again, arguably one of the most momentous victories for OU considering the recruiting implications. But now we kind of need to see it play out because as we know, this side of the industry is a process.
Yeah, like you said, huge and just sorely needed. The timing of it couldn't have been any better. Yeah, as far as Burns, Baylor, they host Kansas this weekend. I just looked it up.
Got it.
Kansas comes. We talked about Burns a few times. You know, I feel like not that it does anything for you if you don't end up getting them, but I feel like they put their best foot forward as best they can. I mean, we've talked about it as they've tried to add him, you know, kind of late here in 2025 that they've thrown the kitchen sink at him, you know, and he was in town for a great win and as good of a recruiting pitch as you're going to have really is what you just put out on the field. That defense was obviously immaculate on Saturday. The linebackers, Danny Sussman was just a Buckus finalist. I mean, Kip Lewis had the pick 6. Like you've done everything you can to showcase your program and specifically your position to him. So if you don't end up getting them, it's not going to do anything for you. You're not going to say, well, we gave it our best shot, but you kind of can. You'd be like, we did everything we could. Okay. And what more could we have done? You know, so I feel like you can kind of say that a little bit for him. But yeah, I mean, what a huge game. It's so funny to me that the guys got to storm the field with the fans. Yeah. That's hilarious, just a hilarious visual. It was a scene down there, man. So I could see anyone who was there being like, yeah, I'd love to play here because
I asked some of the commits, I was like, did anybody fall? Did you spot anyone taking a tumble going down? I have nothing to report. Hopefully I'll have something to report back soon because those things are disorganized, man.
I've been down for quite a few of them now. I said it on Monday, but never really thought about it before because it doesn't happen in Norman very often. But Owen Field, very stormable. Yeah. It's a low wall, a lot of gates, steps. It's not like some of these stadiums have real high walls where you see people just eat it getting down. It's pretty stormable. So
I'll tell you what, though, man, they probably built that stadium. They built that stadium being like, I mean, this isn't going to be a place where you storm the field, you know, and then suddenly, man, the infrastructure or whatever, it definitely is tailored to that experience.
As far as field storms go, it was pretty organized, pretty tidy, other than the leaving early thing, but we digress. As far as someone who was not there, Michael Fasusi, obviously we talked about it going into the weekend, was going to go to Austin instead. He did. No changes there. He was in Austin over the weekend. Expect to be in College Station this weekend for that massive Texas A&M tilt, which we talked about that last week as well. A week till signing day, right? I mean, it locks in next Wednesday. We talked about Michael a ton, and I guess just kind of your last thoughts here before December 4th next week. He was in Austin. I mean, he wasn't in Norman, but it couldn't hurt what Oklahoma did on the field. And specifically, the offensive line played quite well in the game. Best game they've had all season. We talked about that a little bit on Monday as well. That position, that group, it feels a little more like, okay, it's not as much of a complete mess as it was, we thought maybe, several weeks ago. You have a couple pieces there, seemingly, and some young guys that are developing and playing better, like Logan Allen, Hito Zaida, among others.
Man, they played well.
Played very well. Where are you kind of at with Fasusi with a week to go until signing day in terms of the trip to Austin, the trip to College Station coming up, what impact Saturday had, if any? Just kind of wrap it all up for us as this saga finally starts to wind down here for one way or another.
Yeah, that win sends shockwaves to recruits that weren't even in attendance, and it definitely reached the most important prospect in terms of considering the caliber of victory there. So Michael Fasusi takes that visit to Texas, and it was a really productive one. Sat in on some team meetings, was talking to some people around him, and really just kind of soaking in the atmosphere, taking in Austin one more time, and reevaluating the Longhorns as a potential destination. Had a good trip, some good conversations with Kyle Flood, Chris Gilbert, Steve Sarkisian, other members of the staff. I believe Deron Gatewood. Good trip for him in Texas. Got to hang out with some of the other recruits at UT. The thing that I have found kind of fun and interesting to talk about is, if you're Oklahoma, what do you prefer? I think the natural preference would be for him to have been there for Oklahoma's beating of Alabama. But man, definitely provides a distraction if you're OU to go and win in that way, and timing it up perfectly to where Michael Fasusi was getting calls and texts from the OU commits and the other recruits, and people were hitting him up. And I was told that Michael watched, if not the entirety of the game, as much as he possibly could with his family during the drive back. The direct quote I was given was, quote, freaking out while they watched OU beat Alabama in the car. Apparently, everyone in the vehicle, all the family, including Fasusi, was elated while they were watching that game. But like you mentioned, the offensive line plays extremely well, and with a lot of backups in there. He takes to social media and obviously interacts with everything that's out there about the win. I saw someone sent to me that he shared on his Instagram story that Fabechi Wiwu picks up SEC offensive line week honors. So he's engaged.
Yeah.
If you're Oklahoma, you're saying it is unfortunate he wasn't there. At least we did what we needed to do to get some sort of very notable distraction together while he's out in Austin. I think Texas should be pretty happy with what was accomplished. I also personally believe that we haven't even necessarily tackled the biggest threat for a potential flip. You mentioned it. He's going to what's going to be the game of the week in College Station. Texas A&M, Texas, the old Thanksgiving week reunion between these foes, these rivals, and it's going to be electric. I mean, if let's say the Oregon-Ohio State atmosphere has been labeled the best of the college football season, or this Oklahoma upset over Alabama, that environment has received its praise. You have to assume what's about to go down out there in C-Stat is going to be pretty legendary. I do think it's interesting that Michael went on the Texas visit with dad and his sister. Mom didn't make the trip. Sean Hutton was not there. Sean Hutton, who's obviously his best friend, his teammate, who's going to be his roommate at Oklahoma, was at OU for the Bama game instead. I still think that both Michael and Sean are going to go to this game in College Station. I think anyone who can get a ticket rightfully deserves the opportunity to go sit in those stands. I would.
Hard to blame him.
here's what I think everyone's trying to figure out. What's the outcome you want if you're Oklahoma? What do you want Fasusi's experience to be? I don't know. Do you want A&M to win the game and for that to be what it is, what it's going to be, and then for those conversations afterwards to be what they would probably be like? Do you want Texas to go in there and win and then have them all going to try and find Fasusi or hitting him up? Like, what's the ideal outcome in this scenario? I don't know that there is one. It's just something that's being talked about. At the end of the day, and I noted this in the in-depth recruiting notebook I put together, if you're Oklahoma, the only thing that you can do right now is figure this offensive coordinator thing out as soon as humanly possible.
Yeah.
Get Michael Fasusi some sort of word as to who that's going to be and how that individual views the future of OU's offensive line coach and Bill Bedenbaugh. Because if Bill Bedenbaugh is still around in Norman, and Mike knows that, I have been told by several people, it's still very, very likely that Michael would go, I'm going to go play for Coach B. That's my guy.
Sure.
In fact, one source told me, quote, father-son relationship is how Michael views his bond with Bedenbaugh. And you can see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to probably, it would be pretty nice if you're Oklahoma to figure out a way to go beat LSU. I mean, don't, count your chickens before they hatch type of thing. But again, wouldn't hurt if you were able to provide yet another quote unquote distraction at a time where, again, I think this is the more impactful in-game experience Fasusi's getting ready to go see. The timeline is still the December 4th date to begin the early signing period. I was told there's going to probably be some sort of ceremony. I'm planning on going, obviously. And so, like, anyone wondering what the timeline's going to look like, this is going to be decided very shortly after the conclusion of the regular season. Oklahoma, if it's not 12:01 a.m. the Sunday after the LSU game that they have something ready and put together as far as the future of the offensive staff, it's got to happen quick. It's got to happen before the early signing period, because what Michael Fasusi is getting ready to walk into at Texas A&M, what he's already seen at Texas, you're really opening a window of opportunity where you're allowing these programs to step into the door of possibility if you don't have a plan ready and ironed out. I think Oklahoma's still on track to get something together before the start of the early signing period. If that doesn't come together, I mean, we're not just talking about Fasusi either. So that's where things stand. We'll see how this weekend goes. We'll know more out of that trip. And Oklahoma continues to hold its breath as its 5-star recruit, kingpin of the 2025 class, highest ranked offensive tackle pledge in the history of the program, by the way, and a top 10 all-time commit, looks elsewhere while the uncertainty still looms for the Sooners.
Yeah, it just feels paramount, in particular with Fasusi, but like you said, really the whole class offensively, to just have some semblance of stability before they have to put ink to paper. I mean, knowing who's going to be there, even less so as much as who the offensive coordinator is, as much as, like we've talked about before, who the position coaches are, or at least, is position coach X, whether that's Bill Bedenbaugh or one of the other ones, are they going to be there? And any kind of fluidity or, that being up in the air whenever Wednesday comes is going to make it your job harder, obviously. So we'll see. We'll see. On that note, I mean, sign day is next Wednesday. Obviously, we talked about Caleb Burns is looking to make his decision. Obviously, Fasusi is going to be a major storyline, just obviously has been throughout this whole season, really, from a recruiting standpoint. Is there anything else for you? And obviously, we'll have the full kind of reaction next Thursday afterward. But was there any other kind of going into signing that you're going to be looking for as far as the OU class is concerned, whether there's any drama or just any storylines you're looking for at all that we haven't already touched on going into next week?
Yeah, so the natural and obvious are going to be Michael Fasusi, the quarterback situation.
Sure.
I think we touched on it, like you mentioned. what happens with Caleb Burns? And if nothing happens with Caleb Burns, what does Oklahoma do at the linebacker spot in 2025? Do they choose to do anything? Sure. I know, like,
a pretty deep position still on the current.
Right. That's the tricky part. And I think people forget this. Oklahoma is so incredibly deep at the linebacker position, even after this year. And you still have Marcus James committed and the transfer portal window is getting ready to open up.
Yeah.
Does Oklahoma choose to pivot? I think that's a huge storyline at the linebacker spot. Defensive tackle. I mean, there's still high school ball going on. Is an offer going to go out? I don't know. That, to me, is a huge storyline. This receiver class that's currently committed, keeping it together, because we talk about Bill Bedenbaugh and his future. A lot can go wrong if Emmett Jones goes elsewhere, folks. A lot can go wrong if one of the best recruiters on Oklahoma's staff is not planning to necessarily be around. I know that Elijah Thomas is pretty locked in. Grayson Harris pretty locked in. Cortez Mills is going to probably be the most discussed potential flip candidate down the stretch here. Nebraska has been hovering intensely. The Huskers really like that guy. Obviously, he visited earlier in the year. We'll see what happens on that front. Manny Choice, I went and saw him last Friday, would that have been? Notre Dame still kind of sniffing around, and I was told by sources that, yeah, Notre Dame has been in contact, so we'll see what happens there. Yeah, look, this receiver class is a really talented one, but at a time where Oklahoma saw a little bit of adversity hit at that position and now is getting ready to enter the unknown that is the portal, whatever that's going to look like keeping those pass catchers together is important.
Yeah.
And so the last storyline that I think I'll mention to round this out is, as the result of all this, where does this class finish in the rankings? You know, Brent Venables, I think a big thing for everyone in Norman, especially the administration, the athletic department, whatever, a big sticking point as far as their belief, their faith in him, is that statistically, he has recruited at a higher level than Lincoln Riley did when he was at Oklahoma. Brent Venables continuing that kind of resume point from a momentum standpoint is big. So if Oklahoma navigates all these different storylines effectively and ends up with another highly ranked class, it's only going to help Brent Venables in the long run and only going to continue to sort of emphasize the investment that should be in place for him as the head coach.
Gonna be interesting, and we'll obviously be there in Norman next Wednesday. Brent Venables usually holds a sign day press conference, so we'll be in town. And then, yeah, next Thursday we'll have the show with obviously the two of us here, and we'll kind of wrap up the class, and we'll kind of do what we usually do. We'll kind of run through the names that we like, instant impact, kind of those superlatives. We'll kind of dive into all that. That'll be next Thursday, so keep an eye out for that. Collin, before you go, obviously we ran long here, been a long show, but before you go, the game this weekend, I always get your thoughts and obviously your pick on the game. It's only Wednesday, so it feels like we're doing this like kind of early. But for you, as far as, you know, Oklahoma, all this momentum off the Alabama game, can they ride it into another big win this weekend? Where are you kind of at with this matchup? And do you think the Sooners can do this and really end on a high note with back-to-back upsets going into the bowl game, wherever that may be?
Well, Oklahoma gave you the blueprint, right? You win the line of scrimmage, you battle it out in the trenches, you're going to win a game in the SEC, and that's not going to be any different of the case going into this weekend's game. LSU's offensive line, a number of elite recruits now realizing their full potential up front, one of the best, especially at protecting against pass rush in the country. Garrett Nussmeier, when he's given time, guy is from my alma mater in Marcus High School. I've seen Nuss for a really long time and have always known that guy, when he's in phase, dude's a gunslinger. And so Oklahoma's ability to rush the passer and win the line of scrimmage, not only getting after the quarterback, but we were talking about this before the show, Josh, the one that got away, old Caden Durham, man. I mean, Southmore zone. He's going to be playing against Oklahoma. I'm sure he's going to be fired up for this one, stopping Caden Durham on the ground. Stopping these LSU receivers. I mean, Kyron Lacey, CJ Daniels, whoever is out there, think the world of those guys. They've got really talented players. And I'll tell you this, I forgot to mention this before we were getting ready in show prep. My favorite tight end in college football to watch, maybe outside of Tyler Warren at Penn State, is none other than Mason Taylor.
Yeah.
That guy is a chain mover, a big playmaker, and a clutch moment waiting to happen. I mean, the kid, since he was a freshman tight end at LSU, has been making big plays. And so keying in on him is going to be huge. This is a lot of offense, defense talk. If you're Oklahoma's offense, just run the ball. Find a way to run the ball. I know that LSU secondary isn't necessarily the strongest in the SEC, but win the line of scrimmage. Find a way to alter the line in your advantage. And if you can just run the ball, quiet the crowd a little bit, to what degree, I don't know, you're going to have a chance. You're going to have a chance at your 7th win. I think Oklahoma is capable of doing so, but we'll see how this goes because they're about to walk into one of the most terrifying atmospheres in our sport.
Can't wait to experience it. Score prediction?
Oh, man, I haven't even thought about this. I forgot we did this.
Of course. People love the predictions. Let's see. OKU, as of now, pulling it up real quick, 6-point underdogs.
Wow.
Depending on where you look.
Yeah, that makes sense. I will go, wow. I had been planning for a long time to pick LSU in this one, but it's hard to ignore what just happened, I tell you. I will go. I'm going to go with, yeah, I'll do it. I'll go with LSU winning at home under the lights. This is the other thing, too, that I think is not getting talked about a lot. All the talk about Oklahoma, LSU's in kind of a do or die mode right now. Not like with necessarily anything on the line.
Yeah.
Man, this is like a emotional point in the season for them. Tigers did not have the year that they wanted. I think it's a very close game. I will go LSU wins 20-17. A field goal late wins it for the Tigers in Death Valley. I think the crowd has a big impact. I think LSU's offensive line has a chance to at least hold up against OU's pass rush. And if Oklahoma cannot complete passes and LSU can key in on the run, again, like playing on the road in this environment is going to be so difficult. And I can't emphasize it enough. LSU, Oklahoma, kind of in comparable situations in terms of the value of this game. I think sometimes you just got to tip your cap and understand the context on your opponent's side. And so give me the Tigers to win in the Bayou in an emotional victory.
Yeah, how does OU kind of put the win over Bama behind them? You know, the last couple of years they've had these really big wins and it feels like they haven't necessarily played great afterward.
Yeah.
Interested in that too.
The emotional wear, I think that's a great point. Like you just went all out at home to beat Bama. And that takes a toll mentally, physically, and emotionally. And now you're walking into Death Valley with LSU in an emotional state. I think it's a great point.
Gonna be a fun one. We look forward to it as always. Collin, appreciate you. Back next Thursday, like I said, to kind of wrap up all the signing day stuff. And I guess we might do a little like, what's the bowl going to be? We won't have a game to look forward to, but we do have a bowl down the road, which is nice. We'll look forward to that. We're back next Thursday. We'll do some signing day stuff amongst other things. Have a good weekend, man. Playoffs, Thanksgiving, all that good stuff. And we'll catch up with you next week.
Happy Thanksgiving, folks out there. Really appreciate all of you tuning in, listening, watching on the YouTube channel, and subscribing to the site Sooners Illustrated. Again, we've got our Black Friday sale going on. 75% off a year-long subscription. That gets you access to the entire 24/7 Sports Network. Obviously, one full year of insider Oklahoma athletics coverage and recruiting coverage. At the end of your year-long subscription, you get free Paramount Plus access. And at the end of the day, folks, it's 7 cents a day. I believe the total price is like $26.85 for the year. Hope you'll come along and join us. But regardless, happy Thanksgiving, everyone out there. Safe travels. Enjoy time with family and friends. And we appreciate you all being part of this site.
All righty. We'll get James D. Jackson to the show to wrap up a little in-state recruiting talk, and then we'll send you on your way into your Thanksgiving weekend. So get James in here right now. Alrighty, pump fake. James couldn't make it on the program today, so that'll do it for this edition of the Sooners Illustrated podcast. Be back next Monday with Tom and presumably James to wrap up the show, wrap up the LSU game after Tom and I head out to Baton Rouge this weekend. Game preview coming up Friday morning, where we'll set the stage for Oklahoma and LSU. Keys to the game, players to watch, obviously our final score predictions, all that usual stuff will be there. So keep an eye out for that Friday morning, wherever you get your podcasts or here on the YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe to Sooners Illustrated. We'll see you on Friday for the game preview and the next Monday for the next edition of the show. For Collin Kennedy earlier, I'm Josh Callaway signing off for now on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.